Hey everybody, welcome back to Deconstruction Stories. I have here with me today Alyssa Mullett. Alyssa, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure, Morgan. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, so this talk, I've been thinking about this talk for so long. I think when I first set up my private practice and the algorithm was figuring me out, they sent me your stuff immediately. So it's awesome that we're like just now getting around to that. But yeah, TikTok, you were like maybe like day two, day three of me being on TikTok, and they finally figured out this girl loves religious trauma. We're gonna send her this sassy TikTok account. And so I just kind of have been a fly on the wall with your stuff ever since. And so it's
Same.
it's great to actually meet you. Good, awesome. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I cannot wait to dive into it. Let's start with your personal deconstruction story.
Yeah.
How does that sound?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
So I was raised Mennonite, and
Okay.
most people have an orientation to Amish, right?
Yeah.
And so as with most high control religions, it has a hierarchy. And so Amish is really the most conservative, obviously, of the hierarchy. So
Yeah.
Amish, don't have electricity most of the time. In the sect that I was raised in, we had the Old Order Amish, which
Okay.
means some people are fairly familiar with like that MTV show, like Breaking Amish, I think it was called or
Yes.
something, right? Where they
Yeah.
had the opportunity to have Rumspringa and go out and be wild. Our Amish never had that opportunity. You didn't get the opportunity or the window to go out and enjoy the world and come back into it. So in any case, it starts with the Amish, no vehicles, no electricity. Then it goes to conservative Mennonites, right? And and even before that layer, there's the intermediary layer of what we refer to as beachy Amish, which is actually most because the last name was Beachy. And so that's how my dad was raised growing up. He was raised in this Beachy Amish sect. So he did have a car, but they had to be a certain color. No, they had electricity, but it was very limited, and certainly no television or anything of that kind growing up. And still went to like Amish school, right? They have
Okay.
their own schoolhouses. And those only go up to like the eighth grade or something like that.
Okay.
Then the conservative Mennonites, which the majority of my extended family, which the faith is rooted in my father's side of the family, and so he was the oldest of 10, and all of my aunts and uncles were in the conservative Mennonite bracket. Those
Okay.
folks drive cars, have electricity. Some have TVs, some do not. Some homeschool, some do not.
Okay.
Um, Majority of the women do not cut their hair. They wear it conservatively braided up in either a white bonnet with homemade clothing, or for the fashionably reserved,
Ooh.
they have like this lace doily thing that they can
Okay.
wear. It could be white or black. We used to
Okay.
call them sin sifters.
Ooh.
I kind of laugh at myself about that. But it goes to the point of I was in that lowest bracket of just regular Mennonite, right?
Okay.
And I think my point in laughing at myself, referring to, my cousins and my aunts that used to wear the coverings as sin sifters, is to say, I suffered from this myth of progressiveness. And I think that
Mm.
it's very common amongst high control religions where there's these different hierarchies, right? And so you can so clearly see the cage of others. And
Yeah.
so by design, you
Yeah.
do not see your own.
Ooh. Okay, I love that because that just gave me chills. Okay.
So that is the story of how I was raised in the faith and indoctrinated as a Mennonite.
Oh my goodness. Okay. I love that. I love that. So, Good Girl Deconstructed.
Yeah.
I I love that brand name.
Thank you.
Obviously I'm a sucker for anything that has the word deconstruct in it. My practice is called deconstruction counseling, and I just I knew before I went back to school that that was going to be my practice's name, because this is my passion. Like, this is
Yeah.
the heart behind why I became a therapist in the first place, and like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So tell me about the name Good Girl Deconstructed. Like, where did that come from? How did you come up with that?
Yeah. So, it's actually, it's funny because my husband came up with it. Um, and, but it is rooted in the performance of goodness that we are taught and ingrained with, right? Um,
Okay.
Especially as women in the church, we are not taught to have a foundational identity. We are defined by the roles that we perform. We are not valued for who we are, but rather what we can do for others, primarily the men, right? And so Good Girl Deconstructed is really a dismantling of that hierarchical subservience. It further speaks to me personally, and one of the core tenets of how I came to pull the thread of my deconstruction was through romance reading. And
Ooh.
if you know anything about romance reading, there's hundreds of different tropes and that kind of thing, but there is, this praise kind of element that Good Girls has a very different context to to the world than it does in how I was raised. And so
Yeah.
the contrast between those two things really says exactly who I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. Because you're getting really real about messages about gender roles, what relationships are supposed to look like
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. Just the patriarchy. Just, I don't know. I feel like
Right?
that just encompasses a lot. And
Yeah.
so, like, in your upbringing specifically, what exactly did the patriarchy look like? I mean, I grew up in more evangelical spaces, and so this
Yeah.
is different. Like, there's a lot of separateness from society. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, talk about the Christian bubble. Like, the Mennonite bubble's like a whole other thing.
That's right. So, not only was the conservative bubble of being in this faith very small, I was raised in a very, very small, you can't even call it a town, it was a village.
Yeah.
I had 36 kids in my graduating public high school class. That doesn't speak to the fact that I had 36 first cousins just on my father's side, but most of those folks were homeschooled or that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
the hierarchy, the patriarchy is again very much male centered, right? The roles of women are in support and helpmate of that. As such, I was raised to always center authority, always center the power, right? And what that actually looked like in my household was a little different, I think, from how some of it might have looked even in my cousin's household. My father was very shy, meek, reserved in a way that he didn't have to speak in order for you to know what was being communicated. Okay. My
Okay.
mother was the mouthpiece of the family. Um, my brother and I used to refer to her as the source because we didn't actually tell each other anything. It all went through her. And so I think it looked a little bit differently in my family just because I was raised by, and I think, but I don't think that this part is different. I think that the church keeps folks emotionally immature on purpose, right? And so I was raised by two people that were very emotionally immature. They were children when they had my brother. My mom was barely out of her teens when she had me, and my brother is 4 years older than me. So, you know, children raising children is never a really great foundation to start kind of breaking down generational trauma issues, all of that stuff. So it's this foundation of, built on that hierarchy within the church that is male centered, which is obviously really detrimental too, because you add in purity culture on top of it, and oh my goodness, this is a recipe for disaster. A recipe
Yeah.
for disaster. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And it's
where
a
I found
recipe for
myself.
enabling abuse. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I hear as you're painting this picture, there's so much isolation. There's so much of like, ooh, we're just gonna be quiet. Like I'm getting those vibes.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even realize how small my world was. I, at 40 years old, I had been out of the house for 20 plus years. I have been married for nearly 15 years at that point. I was still trying to figure out who the heck I was. And that meant not really like, who am I in the existential terms. I was still orienting myself in systems and people by what I could do for them, how I could perform for them, because that was how I was taught. That was the only orientation to the world that I understood how to be. And what's interesting about that is that it had both great and bad points. I mean, I can go on and on about the bad points, but to the good point of that, it made me a really top-notch professional corporate HR gal. I mean, I could climb that corporate ladder like nobody's business, and so it worked out really well in that regard.
Yeah.
It may also made me burn out before I was 35. It had cascading effects to my health. But I, even at 40, did not understand that my worldviews were so small. It wasn't until I really started to read both romance and non-romance to understand like how other people lived and what was actually normal. And social media, for all its flaws, that was really an eye-opener for me. I saw depicted in TikToks these relationships that women had with their fathers that I was like, oh my gosh, is that people really have that kind of relationship where they can talk with their dad? They can like say I love you, he says it first, like they felt completely open to be able to have a communication and open dialogue. I had no idea that that's the way that was actually supposed to work, that I should have expected that. And it was devastating to realize that I never had that and I was never going to have that. But by reading, by starting to write myself, initially it was just like a journaling practice for myself, even just in pencil, because I was like so afraid, I think, of and unsure, right? Again, the church demands that we divorce ourselves of self-trust. We have to give it to God, right? We are flawed. We are innately sinful. We have to, give it all to God, and then God will determine the meaning and the purpose behind our suffering, because without God, it is all meaningless. And so it was this really painful start to trying to tease out who I was outside of this really, really smallly defined world that I understood.
That sounds scary.
It was tremendously scary.
Mm.
I think back to those years, and it hasn't actually been that long, but it feels like lifetimes, right? I had my first political conversation with my father in 2018.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I mean, because again, our family and in the Mennonite faith, politics is not talked about. It is
Okay.
not. It at that time, it was not preached about. It was
Okay.
not talked about. That has since shifted in a very devastating way as well.
Of course. Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
but in 2018, I had this conversation. I remember it distinctly, sitting out on my back deck with my dad and actually having a conversation about what he thought about different things like gun control and immigration. And I was speechless when I realized that my father had aligned himself with Trump and the MAGA cult. I was devastated, and I voiced in those moments, I remember saying to him, "Do you not understand? I don't feel safe in Trump's America. As a woman, I am not safe." And
Yeah.
he's like, "I don't understand why you would say that." And I gave him lots of examples, right? And of course, Fox News doesn't play those examples. So he did not have an understanding, nor was he willing to accept my liberal talking points. So that started to fray the thread once again. Then in 2019, I had my first ever big argument as an adult with my mom.
Ooh.
We were having a conversation, and it kind of happened in passing. They live about 2 hours away from me, still now, and I had taken my son back to visit for the weekend, and I was just dropping him off and then coming back. And my mom had mentioned something about one of my nieces. I have two nieces, and something about their modesty. And
Okay.
I had that at that point started to really see the through point of purity culture and some, not all, but some of the harms that I had experienced from purity culture. And so I remember my response being something to the effect of, we really need to look up and research for yourself, Mom, what the term modesty actually means and where that's coming from. Like, isn't it most important that my niece feels comfortable in her clothing? Isn't it most important that she feels confident in what she's wearing? And then I started to talk about how those things, such as modesty, had really impacted me, and some of the harm that I
Mhm.
experienced as a result of that those teachings. And she said, "I disagree." And in those moments, I was stunned once again, but I turned to her and I said, "You do not get to disagree with my lived experience. It is mine,"
Mm.
right? And that is whenever she asked if I was being, quote, guided or led by therapy. And I laughed out loud. I did. I said, "You're seriously questioning me whether I'm being guided or led?" Um, that was a moment of shift in our
Yeah.
relationship. And the ensuing uh, time and space that I took as a result of that conversation was really the turning point of our relationship.
Mm.
I started to develop these things called boundaries. I
Ooh.
know, it's very scary stuff. And the worst part about boundaries is you can make them, but holding them is the really, really tough part, right? And so I started to have boundaries around the amount of time that I would spend in conversation with my mom, because at that point we had been speaking every single day on the phone.
Okay.
And it was my orientation and my relationship with my mother was always, because of the emotional immaturity in the relationship, I was always the emotional caretaker in that
Okay.
role,
Yeah.
right? So I was parentified, and I have a tremendous amount of empathy. I want to make sure I make this point. I have a tremendous amount of empathy for my mother. She was an orphan. Her father died when she
Mm.
was 6 months old. Her mother died when she was 6 years old. She was raised by older siblings. She is the youngest of 13. And so
Wow.
I empathize deeply with her lost childhood. I understand sincerely why she married my dad at age 16, why she had my brother the same year. I understand why she latched so hard onto his faithful family.
Yeah.
And it doesn't give her the right to weaponize her faith. It doesn't give her the right to absolve herself of the harm that the indoctrination created for me. So, all of these boundaries that I created, they started to have a really rough time with, because it looked like when she would call on the phone, I wouldn't answer every single time, because it looked like when she would start to talk about my nieces and what she thought was appropriate, or any kind of developmental thing, I would get quiet. I would just not say a darn tootin' word, and then she would be like, "Oh, I guess I'm not allowed to talk about that." Righto. And then it
Ooh.
was,
Okay.
anytime there was a conversation around my dad, I would, again, because I was trying to divorce myself of that emotional caretaking role, I kept quiet.
Yeah.
Um, and she's like, "Well, who else am I supposed to talk about these things with?" Again, I, on multitudes of occasions, was like, "There's this thing called therapy, and it's great.
Yeah.
You should try
It's
it."
secular,
Right?
Sometimes it's secular.
And that is the exact orientation, Morgan.
Yeah.
There is no help to be sought outside of God and the faith. And Christian counseling is as much as you're going to get. That is the marker.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these things, the conversation with my father on political affiliation, and just the enormous amount of dissidence that I started to experience
Mm.
between
Hmm.
this person who raised me and this very devout man of faith, and this hateful rhetoric that he was now aligning himself with. I could not figure out how those two things fused together.
Yeah.
And that created this tear in, well, if it has to kind of be either or. I don't know how you hold those two beliefs at the same time. And so for me, this over here, this MAGA thing, I was never going to hold this belief. And then I started to question this belief over here. If my mother doesn't believe that I was harmed and I have experienced harm, can this be believed? That further fractured whenever I started to put up those boundaries, and their reactions to those boundaries over a 2-year period were really devastating.
Okay.
I detail this in some of my writing, but one of the ways that it really was earth kind of shattering was I realized that in order to love me, there were conditions. And those conditions required me not to have boundaries. When that kind of parental love is conditionized, it is deeply harmful. Realizing that this love that I thought at the foundation of everything was unconditional. I had been told repeatedly, reminded so voraciously that this was unconditional. No one will love you like we love you. This is
Ooh.
unconditional, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If it is in fact the very definition of conditional, what else do I not understand about the world? It ripped my world apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's powerful to realize on your own
Yeah.
that you've been gaslit. And I know
Yeah.
that's a strange word to use, and I know that's a
No,
dramatic word to use, but that sounds completely accurate
that's,
because
yes. That's
that was
so
not
exactly
like,
it.
yeah.
It's
Yeah,
so
it was not
exactly
matching
it.
the reality.
And so that's why I started to write, because I was intent of like, I cannot let myself feel like I am being gaslit out of my
Yeah.
own experience. I
Yeah.
had to write it down.
Yeah.
Um, Even if it was just a record of how I felt and I didn't have the language or the context by which to frame it at that point, right? Um, I often describe this deconstruction process as you're peeling an onion, but yet you don't even know that you have an onion, and you just keep ripping away these layers, trying to figure out where the
Yes.
rot is, how deep
Yeah.
it goes,
Yeah.
and you cry a lot. Process too, and it's really
Yeah.
painful, and you just don't know when it will ever end. And the answer, beautifully and painfully, is it never does. But that's the opportunity too. Is you also get to reconstruct. And for me, that's where I found my power, my hope, by being able to reconstruct identity for myself.
Okay.
And I did that through my writing. I just started to, again, make sure that I understood my own experience. I did not share it with anyone initially for the first couple of years because I think it's also because, you know, oftentimes in the church, we are expected to share everything, that we owe our full selves to everyone at any given moment, um, especially that hierarchy, right? That
Yeah.
authority figure. And so for me, creating an intimacy in my own mind with myself was a really new experience. That was
Yeah.
where I started to create safety for myself. In the midst of all of what I understood of the world to be crumbling, I could start to turn inward and realize, okay, this is how I create me. This is how I create self safety, self trust by trying to name and articulate my values. That was, um, again, another outgrowth of being on that corporate ladder and just always reaching for the next thing. I also in my continued pursuit of education and credentials got professional coaching certification.
Yeah.
And so I had this knowledge and this kind of fallback skill set to be able to anchor myself
Yeah.
within the world that I understood now to be crumbling,
Hmm.
that I could say, okay, let me go back to what I know what I've been taught that is external to the religious indoctrination, to these systems that have harmed me. And so I fell back to my coaching mindsets, and I started to get curious about myself. I started to notice without judging myself, asking a lot of questions, and a core tenet of it being also reframing how I spoke to myself, right?
Okay.
We are taught that shame is like a second skin. There's always something to be shameful about, right?
Of course.
I mean, the original sin and all. I mean, we are, innately bad. We are full of sin, and only
Yep.
through God are we, saved, whatever, all of the things, right? And so to realize that I do not have to hate away the pieces of myself that I wish to change, right? I can love myself deeply, and
Mm-hmm.
that is good and right. That
Mm-hmm.
I am whole and good and right. That
Yeah.
there is nothing that I have to do to perform that for anyone else. So it really became this internal job, this internal work that allowed me the space to start having those pieces somewhat come back together in the
Yeah.
reconstruction of self. Yeah.
Okay. I love that because I think reconstruction is a phrase I hear a lot. And at the beginning of my journey, I think it always like kind of gave me the ick just because it reminds me of Christian Reconstructionist
Yeah.
ideology. I think about the Dominion theology and the Seven Mountains and R.J. Rushdoony and theonomic movements and all of that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of like carries those connotations for
Yeah.
me. But what you're describing, this reconstruction, like this is so beautiful. Like you get to choose who you are now.
Absolutely. I mean, I can totally understand the kind of the ick of it of
Yeah.
reconstruction,
Yeah.
I want to say too, like, for some folks, they deconstruct, right, and then reconstruct faith and spirituality in a different, more meaningful, comprehensive way for themselves.
Yeah. And that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I always say, good girls know no bounds of honor and joy for others that have done the work, right?
Yes.
You
Yes.
want to applaud. There is not a singular piece of the pie that is less than because someone else makes a different choice than you. So
Yeah.
I celebrate anyone that has done the work of deconstruction, and their journey looks different than mine.
Yeah.
I get it. I totally do. I love, for instance, Jen Hatmaker. She has a whole
Yeah.
thing of reconstruction. She reconstructed in the faith. That is
Yeah.
not me. Um, I describe my spirituality much like I describe my understanding of sexuality, that it's on a spectrum, and in order to stay sane, I stay bi-curious.
Okay.
So I really don't have an orientation to organized religion whatsoever. For me, those systems are harmful. And specifically the element of purity culture.
Yes.
That has been the most painful part and most harmful part, I think, for me. You know, I will also say that I'm not alone in that. And I know that
Yes.
because I see the stories just like
Yeah.
you. You hear the stories, you have that experience. And I've also read the research papers that correlate religious trauma as not only just the experience of this binary thinking of good or bad thoughts, but also the harm that occurs whenever you try to deconstruct and leave the community. Um, that in and of itself is traumatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then there's
Yeah.
also this corollary data around, specifically for women, that correlates religious harm and the purity cult to having later in life, or not later in life, in adulthood,
Yeah.
you have autoimmune disorders and diseases, more prevalence,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Because you
Yes.
have a higher ACEs score, which also includes these diseased factors as an adult. And that was true for myself. I
Mm.
physically had those symptoms. I physically experienced an autoimmune disorder. Not unrelatedly, it occurred after I did a missions trip with my mother. And that is something also that I've had a lot of shame around now, even in deconstruction, right?
Yeah.
And so that the shame doesn't stop whenever we name it.
Yeah.
Then we have to take accountability for the ways in which we participated in the system of harm. And I now understand that missionary work is colonization and is hurt people of indigenous cultures. And I have a deep regret over those kinds of things. And there is not any good that can come from me continuing to live in that shame spiral, because that closes my mind. Shame seeks to silence.
Yeah.
And I will not let my own shame silence my being able to listen to those components of harm. And I won't let the shame that others try to force on me silence me either. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's beautiful. I mean, so many thoughts. So many thoughts.
Okay.
So you're real and you're raw and you're outspoken and you're out there on social media. So am I. So I can't help but wonder, how often do folks disagree with you? Maybe they have some prayer requests for you. They have some things that they would love to share with you regarding you going to hell, things like that.
Yeah.
I get that on a daily basis. So I was just kind of curious, like, what kind of pushback do you get from that community? Because it's hard to hear that you're in a cult.
Yeah, it really is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I get it. You know what's interesting? For me personally, even though I talk equally about deconstruction, I also speak about my resulting parental estrangement. So part of my deconstruction journey, unfortunately, includes being fully estranged from my parents. And I am now in my 4th year of complete estrangement, no contact with my parents. I get more feedback, if we're going to call it that.
That is such a gentle way to say it. Okay.
Right? I get more feedback about the estrangement component and content than anything else. Because, again, it speaks to that hierarchy of authority. Really has its roots not just in the church, but also in then being applied in society, right? And so they want us at all costs, no matter the abuse, no matter the mental anguish, no matter the emotional neglect and harm, to always honor your father and mother. And estrangement says, I reject that. And so that is, I get more feedback on the estrangement component than I do on the, certainly I get the, I'll be praying for you, and I'll be like, no thanks, I'm good.
That's funny.
All fold up.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting? Even with the extended family, like I of course am like, when I say no contact with my parents, I by then choice and default have never tried to reach out to my aunts and uncles in that way, because
Okay.
again, they all live nearby my parents,
Yeah.
and so I would never try to make people take sides, because I also know I've already not been chosen once. They've chosen not to understand me. I'm not going to try to test my luck at other folks, because that's just a recipe for disaster, right? Um,
Yeah.
there was one cousin that I did maintain kind of an emailing relationship with, the one that was closest in age with me. But unfortunately, in this period of knowing who we are and where we stand and with whom we stand, ideologically, politically, in the world today, you have to know. If you
Yeah.
don't know where you stand, I can't stand with you.
Yeah, you might just be sitting in your privilege.
Exactly that.
So there's that. Yeah.
Exactly that. Exactly that. Yeah. So that, that is living with grief, as I refer to it. Estrangement is the living grief. You're
Mm-hmm.
grieving people and relationships, communities, whole systems of support that you no longer have access to.
Yeah.
And so that has been one of the most painful pieces of my own deconstruction journey.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think grief encapsulates it perfectly.
Right.
And so I really feel like deconstruction is grief work.
Mm.
And maybe it's not how we typically think about grief. We think about grief as, okay, somebody died or you got divorced or something like that. And that's why my one little Medium article, you are like a killing it on Medium. You're
Thank
killing
you.
it on Medium. But that's why my one little article, I'm like, my one little representing myself as a therapist out here. Deconstruction is grief work. That's the soapbox
Yeah.
I'll stand on all day long, And I think just allowing space for that grief and like not beating ourselves up for feeling this way or all of that stuff, because a lot of clients have come from these backgrounds where, okay, for example, if somebody dies, what are you supposed to think? You're supposed to think, oh, well, we're happy for them because they're in heaven, right? And so there's a lot of, in this culture, there's a lot of like bypassing the grief and bypassing the sadness. And
Yeah.
so much for lamentation, so much for there's a time for everything. We're supposed to be shiny, happy people all the time, right?
Good reference. Good reference.
Thank you. Thank you. And circles back. But yeah, and I think there's not a lot of psychoeducation in those cultures of how to feel the feels, how to feel the sad feels. It sounds like everything gets spiritually bypassed. Everything just kind of gets covered up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would concur. Again, I think that that's one of the reasons why I write, right? Because
Yeah.
that was the system that I was oriented to bypass
Yeah.
all of that.
Yeah.
And I think the most overwhelming description of how I experienced deconstruction in those latter stages, or in these late stages, because we're never really done, right? Is there is this feeling of more, like of a distinct before and after, and this, yes, overwhelming grief, and just the orientation of being wholly more in every facet and aspect, having more emotional capacity, feeling deeper joy, realizing that, like, by naming my own values and not performing goodness, I'm actually a more moral person. I act
Yes.
in accordance with those values, because
Yes.
I don't have some externalized system that I've devoted myself and my thoughts to bypassing the actual work of being a human in the world right now. I think that adage of if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything is really applicable. And often the process of deconstruction can get kind of minimized by saying that you're not really, debating theologically what is meaningful or all of those things, right? Everyone's going to have their own perception of what constitutes the most appropriate way to deconstruct. And if you haven't done this, then it's not real deconstruction. And here's the thing: you're still in the system. That means you're still in the system. You're still accepting other people's definitions of what it means to be you in the world. And that is the most important part for me, is to be able to say, no, I stand for me. And that's not a nod to like individualism. It is that I can be firmly rooted in knowing who I am and how I operate, such that boundaries become operationalized values, such that whenever I become a community member, I am an important community member making a contribution rather than sucking the community out of the population, right? And having this kind of sincere belonging and wholeness showing up.
Wow. I mean, that's powerful.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to get there. I love how you brought in the values work as well. My therapy style is acceptance and commitment therapy. So I like heard the values and I'm like, yeah, girl.
Yep.
And so I love this idea that boundaries are committed action in the direction of your values.
Yeah.
And that sounds really easier said than done, because sometimes that initial pushback, that's uncomfy, because you're messing up all the dynamics, and this dysfunctional system was functioning okay before you came in and messed it up,
Right? And that is why I think that work is really imperative and important. And that's why I include it in my client work with coaching. That's why I include it in my guidebooks that I talk about, that I have on the Good Girl Deconstructed. I help people set those boundaries in terms of, here's how here's your values conflict. Now you've named your values. Here's how your values conflicts. Now here's how you're going to use those to inform how you will operationalize your values in terms of boundaries, right? And to my own experience of, boundaries, again, being rooted in the realness of they do not cause the fracture, they illuminate the fractures that were already there, right? It doesn't make it any less painful. But it helps to have that perspective in navigating through that process. So yeah, boundary work, values articulation. I think another kind of core tenet of how I orient myself in the deconstruction process is curiosity. Curiosity without judgment.
You gotta.
And being able to allow yourself that permission to give yourself love of the highest level. Again, for a lot of us as women raised in the confines of, our virtue being our value and the role performance, being able to shed that shame and that orientation to performing goodness and knowing innately that you are inherently strong, capable, and wise. Those are the coaching tenets: inherently strong, capable, and wise. That it makes the world feel way different. Your experience of yourself is the framework by which everything changes in the world. That's really like what
Wow.
I talk to like folks that would be like in that newbie stage, right? That are scared and really struggling with, do I want to keep doing this? And the answer
Yeah.
is you get to choose,
Yeah.
but it never goes away. Once you realize and you get that little crack in the critical thinking process, you're like, it may like stay status quo for a little bit for you, but
Yeah.
eventually it's going to happen. And so you get to choose, though. You can choose how you move through that process. It can be a completely internalized process. Nobody has to know. You don't have to go on anybody's podcast and declare your declare all your deconstruction woes and your story. You get to have that for yourself. Create the intimacy with yourself. But that's really what it is. It starts with that first most elemental shift, which is to, rather than believing that safety and security and self is defined by these external people, these external systems, recognizing that it is and has always been an internal process, that you are the higher power. You are the one in control of this process. Self belief and self trust, that's how those elements start, is by that self belief and reframing the externalized conditioning that we have all suffered in high control religion.
Yeah. Wow. And it makes it scarier that it's your choice, but that's part of it. Like that's like the whole
What?
thing is that you get to design your life now.
Right?
Yeah.
The amount of joy that I felt after once I for me once I got my story out there with my parents,
Mhm.
that was probably the first, again, the first step for me was being truthful with myself, and that happened through writing, through reading a ton, and then being able to respond to the question, well, but do you still believe in the Bible, with the truth, which for me
Ooh.
was no. I no longer believe in these man-made stories. Um, do I think that, yeah, there was once a historical ancient text that had some of these elements? Sure. But for me, in reading and learning about all the different revisions through history of the Bible, and it no longer was allowable for me to not think that that was a man-made propaganda. And so I could no longer align myself with the messaging, right? And
Yeah.
so to be able to authentically answer that question was kind of life breathing for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. No, I mean, I think about like my own life experience. I grew up with the ESV version and then ended up figuring out, I think during COVID, how that was all produced.
Mm.
And it was a capitalist decision
Yeah.
to try to get published before the TNIV got published. And just seeing like the folks who were working on that version and the other books that they had and the other teachings that they had
Mm-hmm.
that impacted me throughout my childhood, like that was a big point of where it blew up for me. I'm like, wow, like I've been studying the ESV version my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is honestly really disrespectful that they went about it the way that they did. But that's a whole other rabbit trail.
But it also speaks to this not so little component of how many of us experience in deconstruction all of a sudden the widening worldview to say, not only do I not believe this, but like, oh, I don't believe this or this or this or this. Like we're indoctrinated into a specific branch or element. This is the only way right? Of the
Yeah.
thousands of other, branches specifically of Christianity, this is the true and right? And
Yeah.
so once you deconstruct your small world, then again, you got to peel the next layer of the onion to go, oh, well, wait a minute. A lot of people believe in this Bible thing too. Nope, that's not me either. And then, it goes wider and wider and wider. And so you just keep peeling. That's the
Oh,
work. You got to keep
100%.
peeling.
Yes. And I love that metaphor. I've always had the metaphor of like a tangled ball of yarn and you like pull on the thread of doubt, kind of thing. For me, it was the role of women. And I decided that I was equally human just as much as a man. And I was sticking to that. And that mattered to me more
Yeah.
than any spirituality. And so that was where I started.
That's really
Pulling
interesting.
you
Yeah.
know,
I think
yeah.
on a larger context, me too. Um,
Hmm.
in that, how that showed up for me though was with romance reading. So
Yeah.
because I could so readily identify with these fictional women who felt, confident and competent in the
Hmm.
world that was still could be shaped as this hierarchy that I was acquainted with, the way in which they moved and the way in which the authors described their mindsets in moving through that world was
Hmm.
completely different from what I understood about the world. And so being able to place myself in those fictional characters really became the opportunity to go, wait a minute.
Hmm.
Maybe I could actually do this in real life. Maybe I don't have
Ooh.
to be in this role anymore. Maybe I don't have to perform this way anymore.
Hmm.
When I launched my business last year for Good Girl Deconstructed, that was one of the posts that I put out into the world was that I no longer perform in my life, and some in the
Mm.
audience no longer have seats. So you can watch, but
Ooh.
your chair has been taken away. And
Yeah.
there's real power in being able to say that you no longer perform in the roles that you no longer wish to hold. Yeah,
Wow. That's powerful.
it
That's
is.
taking your own power back,
It
you
is.
know?
And that's what's
And
become most important for me in moving through is being able to help other women feel that power, grow that power, reconstruct identity after or in the process of deconstruction, being able to grow community around this powerful need that we have,
mhm.
right? For those of us that have deconstructed. That is that is more meaningful than anything else. Yeah.
That sounds like a lot of work because we were groomed and trained to be good little people pleasers. And
Absolutely.
now we're not exactly doing that. It's uncomfortable.
Right. The persona of being that subservient good girl, being in the mindset of everyone else first.
Yeah.
And also I want to speak to the moms out there because I'm also a mom, and I want to say that this, it's easy as a mom to then say, but my kid, I'm not first because my kid, right? And so
Ooh, okay.
that is, I want to speak to that element of that's part of the system of harm. As part of the system of harm that was really disorienting for me to say, no, in order to be the best mom, in order to truly generate connection rather than just have authority in
Mhm.
parenting, I have to do the work internal first. I have to prioritize me. It's still me and the work that I have to do in order to show up and build that connection and be able to be the kind of mom that I want to be. And that can be really hard for a lot of women to say, no, my kids always come first. I know that feels uncomfortable, and I hold the space for you to, to ask yourself that question, to say, where does that come from in me? Where did that belief come from? Because I guarantee you it came from that system of harm.
Well, that's some tough love right there.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So that gives me a lot of insight into your coaching style, which kind of leads into our final thing. So, Alyssa, where can people find you, follow you, get more resources from you? Just all of that kind of stuff. Can you just kind of info dump on us?
Absolutely. So obviously my website, which is goodgirldeconstructed.com. There you'll see I talk a lot about the reconstruction of identity. I have the guidebooks that are available for digital download. So if you're still in the I'm not sure that I want to publicly do this thing out loud, this is the most beautiful choice, because you can just download this, and the exercises of the boundary holding and unlearning and understanding yourself and your values, all of that stuff are in those guidebooks. I also offer individual coaching, and you can see that on the website as well. I have a few journals out there on the Amazon. One specifically, Inspired Writing for Inspiring Writing, is really meant for folks that are in that deconstruction phase. And it is the first invitation to just hold the space for yourself in those pages. So I include some of my writing and prompts and things of that kind that can be safely held in those pages for you. I also write on Medium, so you can support my writing on Medium. Let's see what else. I think it's also really important to mention that I have found tremendous community with a nonprofit called Together Estranged. And for those of us whose deconstruction journeys include estrangement, no contact, low contact, for those of us who can never go home again, I have found tremendous community and belonging with Together Estranged. So you can check them out at togetherestranged.org, where I am now the CEO of that volunteer organization. And so I invite anyone that needs that place, that safe place, to join us at Together Estranged as well. So those are the main areas that you can find me, and certainly hopefully continuing to have conversations with folks that are doing the good work, such as yourself as well.
Thank you.
And
Alyssa,
I'm on
thank
TikTok
you so much.
too. Yeah, Good Girl
Yes.
Deconstructed, right? Yeah, that's how we found each other.
Yes. Yeah, that was the most important one for me.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Alyssa, thank you so much. And to everybody in my audience, I'll have everything that Alyssa shared in the show notes. So be sure to check that out. I'll put the hyperlinks there and everything. And I wish you the best of luck on your deconstruction journey.